Welcome to 50/50 Books, the book review podcast where the books are split in two, and figuring out just what is going on is always a toss-up. I'm Taylor.
And I'm Jonathan. This episode we are finishing up The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. So Taylor, I feel like we finally really hit the checkbox for fantasy with the books we've read. This one I think has gotten the deepest in so far.
For sure. It's a shame because the ending of this book was not necessarily kind in regards to our schedule. And also the fact that I got sick reading the end of this book. So I feel like I did it a disservice by trying to finish it because my body was in pain.
Yeah. Got that negative association.
A little bit. And then obviously it's been the longest gap between finishing the book and recording this episode, which I'm hoping doesn't cause any issues.
If anything, it'll help keep us together more.
Maybe, but I feel like maybe the excitement might be a little bit down.
Yeah.
When you just finish a book and that satisfying feeling, I'm a little bit worried, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, the sickness for sure. I'm worried about how I'm going to review this book at the end.
Yeah. Yeah, I can only imagine too, because this book does go into the abstract a bit, that when you're sick and trying to recover and you're also trying to keep up with what's going on and kind of what's the setting we're even in. I can imagine there's some difficulty there, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah. For the most part, we're going to start with something that makes a lot of sense, which is book 4, where Zachary is in a crypt. That is where he ended up being led to, where we left off last time. And we kind of get right into the mystery part of all of this happening.
Yeah, this is where it turns into, it feels like the puzzle part of the book, right? You get all this context, there's the doors, all of this stuff. I have to say I had a little bit of trouble latching onto it myself, and maybe it's because I was I'm just reading through the book. I really don't want to step back and figure out what is going on, which is probably a mistake on my part to engage with the book. But I didn't become fully engaged with the what is the meaning and the importance of the sort of choices he's being presented with.
Mm-hmm. Just an aside, did I ask you how you found the end of this book, or did I just ignore it completely? Did you say?
I don't think I did say, actually.
Okay.
I didn't think of it. I figured we'd get to it either way, but I would say for me, given that it was a bit more on the abstract side, I did have trouble tagging along for some parts of it. I still think it was kind of pleasant to read overall, though. So I didn't come off of the book feeling bad. Just maybe there was kind of too much going on for some parts of this part of the book, which also excites me to talk about it a little bit, because I do think I have a lot of questions about what exactly happened.
Yeah, I thought this might be kind of a questioning type of episode, just because there were a lot of different things going on at the same time.
Yeah, and I think there's even just the question of what did the author want the story to be about,
right,
when it comes to the fate and time stuff, because there are some other things looped in there, but there is obviously this focus on fate and time and all these kind of pairs of characters. So I think getting into each one and how they're connected will help clear that up. Right.
Yeah, I definitely had I don't want to say an issue, but some confusion about the theme moral of this story, because it
I agree with that too. Yeah,
it contradicts itself actually at the end.
I think there's a part we'll get into with Mirabel that super confused me on what the point of the book was. So
yeah, and of course it's entirely possible there just isn't a point in the book, which I guess fair enough.
I'd be tempted to believe that, honestly, but yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah. Okay, but yeah, back to the crypt, I suppose. There's really I guess 2 important things. One is we get that first showing kind of I'm assuming it's the darkness, this weird voice being kind of malevolent, I guess.
Yeah, it got kind of mean.
Yes, it does get kind of mean. And it gets worse in that underneath part, but something is seen in the crypt, right? And then Eleanor is having written in the stars pertaining to her paper stars. We're seeing nightmares from Eleanor, kind of also maybe about that darkness. Hers might be a bit more metaphorical, because it seems like she had a lot of hopes placed on her, even if she didn't exactly know about them. Like, I'm assuming she might have felt those pressures, but still, there's some, like, evil entity, I guess, here. I still wouldn't call it the villain of this book.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. I was a little confused at what it was getting at with the voice, because he has kind of the voice in his head he talks to throughout all of the book,
Yeah.
right? And so I guess the assumption is that this is the same voice, question mark?
Maybe.
I don't know, but even by the time we get to the end, I still am not like really 100% sure I know who it represents or like who it was supposed to be. Like there was some thought in my head that it's like, oh, this is like gonna be a thing about Zachary needing to gain confidence, or like he's like suffering through some sort of, you know, mental struggle right now. But then it doesn't really feel like that's what it is. It feels like it is external. So and maybe like we can talk about this later with the bees. So like the bees kind of have this behavior that makes them feel like they're just a voice. So I was like, maybe it's something like that, or maybe I don't know, some being from the past. I was like, maybe like the Owl King has kind of like a not disembodied voice that this is. There's so many things just wasn't sure.
Yeah. I think, like, also, we'll talk about this with Rhyme, but, like, that ability to hear the story and, like, what that voice is. I mean, that's probably just the bees, but, like, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, the normal voice talking to Zachary is trying to get him to continue the story. So it's like the bees. And then, yeah, it seems like whatever darkness is closer to the Starless Sea, maybe it's just fueled by, like, that if you believe a story enough, it'll happen type of energy. So, like, people who believe bad things about themselves help, like, form those bad things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, if Dorian is afraid of losing Zachary, then he's going to be worried about hurting Zachary, or even being betrayed by Zachary, or all of these things. So he's creating his own problems, I guess.
Yeah.
Is probably how that part works.
Mm-hmm.
But also in the crypt, we do get the fragmented paper that tells us that 3 things are lost in time, which is the sword, the book, and the man. Which we have the book, easy peasy. We're all kind of thinking the man at a time is Simon.
I was also just thinking that the keeper might be connected to that too, though. Given some of the things we learned in the first half about him being around for a long time, I was like, maybe it's the keeper, and the keeper is Simon, but then it's like, no, like Simon is Simon.
I also think for a while, I don't know if Zachary thinks this too, but when Dorian falls, I also am like, is it Dorian now? Like...
right, because he's lost down there.
Yeah, he's lost down there, so...
Yeah, I mean, I think that's starting to get into a bit the parallels between all of these characters, though, right? Like, I think that is pretty intentional that Dorian is a bit lost in the way that Simon is.
Yeah, you were definitely right when you simplified, like, my nonsense, and we're kind of just, like, everything is kind of mirroring everything, like, not in the literal sense, but just, like, this more abstract way where characters are like characters. And we definitely end the book kind of with that in mind.
Yeah, I feel like everything is trying to be a time and fate analog in some way. And yeah, like at the end there's like a I know they're not really chapter headings, but there's like a heading of like fate fell in love with time. And it's like, okay, like now we're being really direct about it. But I do think that's what it was getting at for most of them.
Yeah, I agree for sure. And then the sword is just in the keeper's office. So
yeah, this one was kind of disappointing to me.
Yeah, not as lost anymore, I guess.
Mirabel is just like, I found it in a previous life. I'm like, so we don't get to see that? All these stories and we don't get to see?
It kind of just, like, sets up, though, what we get at the end of this book, which is just Mirabel putting everything perfectly into place.
Yeah.
Like, she's not controlling people directly, but she talks about nudges, right? And it's so clear she's making sure everything nudges in exactly the right way.
Exactly.
And then finally, it's surprising it took us this long, but we actually get, like, a real conversation between Zachary and Dorian, like, in a moment of peace.
Yeah, because he was unconscious for so much of the first half of the book.
Yes. And I really liked what this set up, because it's Zachary being honest with Dorian, kind of trusting him immediately, which I'm not mad about. There's obviously some magic shit going on.
Yeah, this, you know how I feel about this kind of like straightforward, like, well, fate is at play here type of
I
stuff.
know.
Like, it's like here we go again. Like, this one was kind of worse for it though. Like, the romance was so handed to you because it was kind of just expected that it was going to parallel some other things, or that like it all had to play into this story that fate has set up. It's like I get it, I can accept it, but I want more.
Yeah, for sure. The surprisingly, the romance is so background in this book that I don't even think about it. Like, it didn't bother me, the fact that they're instantly trusting of each other and stuff like that. And even them, like, kissing at the end of this book, I'm kind of like, whatever. Like, just because it's so not at the front of either of their minds. Like, they were both focusing on, like, separate things happening.
And I can take this explanation of like, oh, like it just felt familiar right away. Right? Like there
Yeah.
is something bigger playing here. It's not like without explanation that he feels that way. So that's why it's not like the worst thing, right? Like, again, like this is where that idea of what is the book actually trying to be about comes up. Like, I think the author really does not want this book to be about a romance. I think she wants that to be an element, and so has set it up to be that.
Mm-hmm. I think the only important thing, I guess, that happens with Zachary and Dorian having this working together moment is they find a passageway through Zachary's wardrobe because of Dorian.
It's very Narnia of them.
Yes, yeah. Which Zachary notes and is like disappointed in himself for not realizing. But I was still on like my Zachary is Moon high at this point. And it only got stronger here, right? Because we basically get the story of the moon and the innkeeper, I guess, as well. Like, she wants to keep him, I guess, in the nicest way possible. Like, she just wants to be with him, right? And so she makes not a deal with death, but like, she just gets death to let her have the innkeeper, which is fine. It's time that she makes the deal with. She will get a little place outside of time, basically, where she can go and be with him. And time will get her assistance in this problem with fate, right? Which we had kind of talked about in the first part. Like, I had thought the moon was just helping out of the goodness of her little heart. It's not really what happened, but the idea is kind of similar. Like, we have the moon helping within this story. I obviously wasn't right about Zachary being the moon, but I do think the connection between Zachary and the moon, which I also mentioned, was right. Like, Zachary is talking with the moon, like, there's just a lot of connection between the two. So it is kind of like that Zachary fate moon, you know, mirroring everything, whatever going on here.
Yeah. The connection here I did feel like was stronger for me was just I think it was Eleanor and Simon like being in that room with the doors, right? And like she would go through one and disappear, and then like time would pass, and eventually that's like how they lost each other, right? So
that does happen in here, yeah. I think the only, like, obviously it's important because we know the moon is helping, but like I think more interesting for me is we get another character within this story, right? Like, Death becomes a character. Because I kept bringing up chance in the first part, like any chance I got, basically. But they didn't come around, so what can you do? But it is interesting we're getting, like, Death as somebody. Not that it really matters, but...
Yeah, it's really only for this moment. Well, I guess maybe it's a bit of a foreshadowing, too.
Oh? Is it? I mean, other than, like, yeah, the death part, but, like...
Yeah, I mean, just his existence, yeah. To like introduce it to the story, because at this point we've already looked for time and fate, and like maybe it's expected that the reader's been looking for time and fate parallels, right? I haven't really looked for a death one yet, so I'm thinking maybe death is introduced here kind of conveniently because they want you to start putting in mind that death is going to play a role in this game.
I guess it's also a good way to introduce like how easygoing it is. Like, it doesn't ask for anything in return. It's just kind of like, yeah, Moon, you can have this dude. And, like, the death we get at the end of this book is also quite, like, kind. Like, it doesn't stick, right? So...
Yeah, very much reversible.
Yes. I guess speaking of death that does stick, though, jumping ahead a little bit. Let's talk about just the entirety of Allegra's character, I guess, because she comes back around, tries to shoot Dorian, and they both end up getting kind of pulled down into this giant chasm. The Keeper is the one that protected Dorian, but it ended up like collapsing that universal clock thing they have hanging up in the heart, and it's just like absolutely destroyed. A little bit before this, we do get insight into like how Dorian became a guardian, which was not a full guardian, kind of like a half guardian. He's never been here to the harbor, but he was like promised that he would someday get to see what he was protecting, like all of, kind of cult vibes.
Told other people too, right? Like there's another character later on the line who's like, everything's falling apart. I think she got that too.
Mm-hmm. And in the first part, we had talked a bit about like why Allegra and the Collectors Club and Guardians in general were like operating this way, like what they were trying to do by just like killing people and not letting people go to the harbor, I guess. And I feel like I was pretty right about this, like the protecting it by not letting anybody go there is kind of the game here. And then the question would be like, well, like what are they trying to protect it from? And we get the story of the painter a couple different times, but we're just going to summarize the entirety of it. The painter, who turns out to be Allegra, doesn't give up their tongue as an acolyte. Instead, she gives up an eye. And so she ends up with this basically ability to like see the story as it's going to play out instead of being able to hear it, which is what most acolytes can do. And so a lot of the paintings you see around the harbor are her painting like what's going to happen, or like probably more symbolic versions of what is going on. And so the assumption is she saw the destruction of this harbor. So like, yeah, not a villain, but like Mirabel talks later about how like the harbor and like the Starless Sea, it wants to be destroyed, like it wants to change into something else.
I think there's like many parts of this of Allegra's story that I find a bit dissatisfying in the end, whether because they're like incomplete or just like I don't understand. Like, so one of the initial thoughts here is that it's interesting that she ends up choosing to get her eye taken out. I know at some point someone asks if Rhyme has a tongue or not. It almost made me wonder if there is like some sort of suspicion placed upon acolytes who choose something other than their tongue, and it sounds like maybe that's like infrequent. So like in a way, like Allegra was already kind of destined to defect in a way like this, right? By having chosen something else.
Well, the weird thing about Allegra, like the chapter about the painter is, before we even know it's Allegra, it's presented as a mistake, right? Like her becoming an acolyte, her giving up an eye, like all of those things are presented as the wrong path that she's choosing for herself. Like I think like becoming an acolyte seemed to make sense in the moment, but like she actually isn't like capable of truly taking on that role, right? Because like if we compare her to what Rhyme does at the end of this book, like Rhyme lets it be destroyed because that's what the story wants, right? And I think Allegra couldn't let it go, right? Like she couldn't let the story progress as it wanted to progress or serve it in that way. So she's trying to change things, but like it's not really what you do.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that's like maybe bothering me about this too is like understanding that motivation from Allegra and these other guardians to protect it. Like, I guess one question that came up was like, is it really that they're trying to protect it from anyone, or is it that they're specifically trying to stop Zachary from coming down? And then like conversely, is Mirabel trying to paint doors to get people in general to come down, or specifically to get Zachary to come down? Because we already know like she has paintings with him in it, so it seems like it could be quite targeted. That like, oh, we know he's the one who's going to end this story, like let's stop him. And actually, let me add one more thing to that too. Like some of the context here being like one of the things I've yet to understand about Allegra's decision and motivations is like I think the keeper says that she wants it to go back to the way it was, and like the way it was had people, right? Like had community, it had a lot of supporters. Like there's no way we get back to there if people aren't allowed down. And so I could only think like it wouldn't make sense for her to not want anyone to come down, but as long as Zachary is a possibility, she doesn't want it to be easy to do so.
Yeah, nothing happens until Sweet Sorrows is found, right? But like the fact that the knitting student was already there must mean that they were watching him for quite a while.
Well, I know too when Zachary's a kid, right, with the painted door that Mirabel puts there, like it disappears. I assume that Allegra had something to do with that.
Yeah, it gets painted over, so
Yeah.
it's probably just a Zachary problem.
Yeah. I don't know. I do stand by like she's not a villain. I do think her story was just kind of cut a little too short. So we can't really like get the full picture. And this is again another place where I'm like, I think the author doesn't actually like want this to be the center of the story, despite how much I've been thinking about it. Like the story isn't really like about Allegra. It's really about it's like the story is about the story going on, I guess, and Allegra stops that from happening. So
Right. She's obviously one of those characters trying to stop the ending, but like, I don't know, it's kind of a missed opportunity a little bit. Like, I feel like if Dorian can stab Mirabel in the heart and like become one of the heroes of the story, then Allegra should get the opportunity
yes, I
to
agree.
shoot Dorian and then also become kind of like a hero of the story. Like
that would be interesting. Yeah. I do feel like this is maybe you're getting at what I'm feeling. It's just like I think there's not redemption for her in a way, right? Like she's kind of posed in a certain light where you're supposed to be really skeptical of her and distrustful, and maybe for good reason. But like she doesn't get her full say, and she doesn't get to like she doesn't get to follow through with anything, whether that's staying the same or changing. So
right, and I also just think it doesn't show Mirabel in a very good light either because Allegra is involved in all of this because Mirabel made it so, right? Like, we get
true.
that in the first part. So she's obviously important for whatever nudges Mirabel has to do. But that does make the characters start to feel a bit like chess pieces rather than like human beings, I guess.
Yep.
And it works out at the very end for Zachary, but there is a moment where we get to the end of the book and it's like, oh, fate did something kind of cruel here. Like it led Zachary, like it was sacrificial lamb, like fuck J.K. Rowling, but like Harry Potter ending type of shit. Like,
yeah,
you know, you've come here, the boy who lived came here to die type of situation, right?
Exactly,
like,
exactly.
And there is something just tragic about Allegra's character in the fact that she chose the wrong path. She wasn't meant to be an acolyte, it seems like, became a guardian in some capacity, but I don't even think that was the right path for her either, and then she just never got to find the right path, I guess. She died instead.
Justice for Allegra.
Yeah, a little bit. It's just like a shame because she also gave like Owl King energy, right? Because of the eye and everything.
Yeah, that was interesting too, yeah.
You could say maybe she had to die so that fate could be reformed, whatever, but like, I feel like the Owl King, which is the name of book 5, which we're about to step into, is... The Owl King is kind of disappointing in this book, I think. Because there isn't one at this point. It's more like an idea of something.
Yeah, there's not like a literal character that's the Owl King, yeah. I would project it onto other things, though. Like, to me, like, Zachary is kind of intended to be the Owl King towards the later parts of the book.
But Zachary's everything.
Yeah, that's
Doesn't
true.
Doesn't need to be everything.
It sounds like he does, because you're right. Like, in the first part of the book, I thought he was going to be time. So, and then he ended up being fate, but then also kind of the Owl King, and also a key. So.
Right, and he's the moon, and like he's the he's Eleanor, but also he's Simon. Like, get a grip. Like,
he's doing too much. Yeah.
So yeah, Allegra, we don't know this yet, but she's dead. So we're just probably that's her character. Yeah. Dorian has some thoughts about how he feels about that for like a moment. So that's interesting at least.
Yeah. Some brief mourning.
Some brief mourning. But this is where things get complicated, because obviously Dorian is in that underneath. He fell into the Starless Sea. The Starless Sea ends up being a sea of honey.
Mm-hmm. And somehow he doesn't die on the way down.
He doesn't die. Well, he is also kind of fate and time and, all
at the least
things.
Protected by fate, right? Like, the story has to go on, so he has to live.
Yeah, and as we've learned, death is kind of chill.
Not for Allegra, I guess, though.
I know. But the honey sea, I guess, is one reason why it's starless, because it's freaking honey, and I guess that's not very reflective. Right. And then also, we hear later that you're right, the reason it's not starless is because we're literally underground.
One thing I thought was interesting about the idea of a star in this book, like, the stars, like, the fragments are obviously, like, the stories, right? Like, bits of story. Mm-hmm. I forget what it was. Someone says that makes me feel like stars also just represent, like, people, and, like, how
Simon.
Yeah, so, right, there's, like, this idea that stars are just people, and, like, we've kind of seen that the underground has emptied out. There used to be all these people down here. So it was not just that there's literally no stars. Like, I think there was that parallel too, of there's really not that many people, even though the rest of this book is like seeing the people who are down here. But like, that aside, it's not that many people.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think it's Simon at least.
Mm-hmm.
So let's try to summarize what Dorian is up to. It's actually not that much, to be fair. He kind of chills in this part of the book. When I saw Eleanor, I think I just put in my notes, like, no, with like 17 O's, because she was here, and I was like, well, I guess all my theories are garbage. So.
Oh, no.
But she's just kind of sailing down here, chilling, kind of looking for Simon, but also not. She's just kind of looking for herself, I guess. She's obviously one of those loose ends that needs to be tied up, but also at this point of the story, she just feels like a way for Dorian to get around.
Yeah, honestly.
Like a plot device more than a character.
And maybe she just needs to exist because Simon has to exist down there.
Yeah.
It just needs to be, we need to show that story is not finished.
Right. But Dorian ends up traveling to this like snowy section where I guess the moon and the innkeeper are staying. And I guess Dorian's expected. He gets a box from the innkeeper that the moon left for him, which I guess ends up being the heart of fate.
Yeah.
Not that complicated to open it, to be fair.
Oh yeah, because it's supposed to be like, there's like a whole thing in the first half of the book about this, no?
The story sculptor, yeah. Yeah, my theory is that like this story happening is the puzzle that needs to be like
sure,
told.
Yeah, like the story needs to be fulfilled.
Yeah, in order to unlock the box, is my assumption.
Honestly, I liked it better when I forgot that it was like a puzzle box.
Oh, well.
It's just the whole fate thing again. I've complained enough about that.
Yeah, well, But that's what Dorian has right now. Other than that, he's kind of chilling. He's, safe, comfortable, and for some odd reason he has the heart of fate, or a heart that belongs to fate. Who can say?
Right.
Mirabel and Zachary end up descending by falling through the elevator. Also don't die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, poor Allegra.
Yeah. And they get separated by owls, which is fine.
Yeah, I mean, at this point in the book, I was like, okay, so there's literally owls. So, like, it is going to be literal, especially with Eleanor having shown up already. And then it kind of wasn't. They kind of just, like, were around and kind of a looming threat for Eleanor's ship, but...
Yeah, the weird thing is we have two owls, behaviors, I guess. There's this one that attack and separate Mirabel and Zachary, which I think is, like, intentional, because Mirabel disappears from this narrative.
Yes, totally.
Which I think is intentional, because she can't just, like, handhold Zachary through this.
Yeah, she can't force it.
Yeah. And then there's another owl that hangs out with Zachary and is, like, super chill and is, like, nice.
Mm-hmm.
But Zachary ends up finding Simon. So here we go, man lost in time. Mm-hmm. We've now checked off another one from the three list. But Simon notes that Zachary is meant to be somewhere else, and something about the story that Zachary's been not Zachary, that Simon's been observing is like changing. It's not right. Something is strange, which I thought was weird because like in my head this is exactly how the story's meant to go for Mirabel to get the ending she wants. So like what about it is like broken or like not right? And I'm curious if it's just these extra tasks, like Zachary finding Simon so that he'd end up reuniting with Eleanor, and like all of the things that Mirabel wants to conclude that aren't really necessary for like the time and fate thing.
Right, they're not really his story. Those are other people's stories.
Right. Like I think nudges is right. Like there are certain key things that need to happen, but like for the most part the rest of it is kind of changeable. And so Mirabel is taking a risk maybe by like including these extra things, like because she does make a point at some point, I can't remember when she says it, but like Eleanor and Simon coming together to have her is something that needs to happen. It's like a key point in time, right?
Yeah.
But like she wonders what happens afterwards. Like, do you just let them be miserable for the rest of their life? Do you let Simon remain lost? Do you let these things happen? And she doesn't want that to be the case. Like, she wants to help them in some capacity. But, like, Zachary doesn't need to help Simon to end up helping fate. Maybe I'm overcomplicating.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just didn't think about this part that hard, honestly. I don't think it's a bad thought process, but...
Yeah. This does feel the most broken from, like, if we're looking at cyclical storytelling, because based on what we said in the first part, Simon the man out of time, being Dorian, being time, like, that line of characters makes sense. But Dorian ended up with Eleanor, and Zachary ended up with Simon.
Yeah, I guess I didn't take that as, like, the story matching those folks up as the same, though. I agree with you that I think Dorian aligns more with time and Simon. Do you feel like that's what this part was trying to point out? Like, do you think it was trying to say that Zachary and Simon were the same?
I think it's supposed to be like, for the sake of the cyclical story, they're not the same. So the fact that they're together in this moment is why the story is broken, and why Simon says that Zachary is meant to be somewhere else. Like,
interesting.
Something about this part changes, like, the symbolism that's happening continuously, which I think is something else. When Zachary ends up in front of the 6 doors, he chooses the 7th, like, hidden etched door, right? Like,
I was very confused about that part. Like, why would we do all this just for him to not choose one of the 6 doors?
Right. He's, like, making the active choice to break away from the symbolism that we followed throughout all of these stories, which I think matters when you're ending a story and trying to tell a new one. Like,
yeah,
you can't beat the cycle by following the cycle type of situation.
Okay, I could see that. This is making sense to me. This might start pushing into later conversations, but trying to figure out what this book is about and some of the contradictions that we see, maybe like trying to figure out if this book was kind of pro-fate or anti-fate, basically. Like, this feels like a moment where it's trying to say, like, what Mirabel's saying of, like, taking the story into your own hands, and, like, maybe she's nudging, but, like, you're really responsible for your own decisions at the end of the day, right? Like, this seems all in line with that.
It's like the Doctor Who thing, right? Like, there are certain things that have to happen in the timeline, but, like, the rest of it is kind of malleable. Like, you can change it.
Yeah, wishy-washy.
That's what I'm assuming is happening here. So, like, yes, most of it is fate. The big parts are fate, but, like, these smaller acts into the story aren't the necessary part. That's just Zachary, which is why he's, like, being trusted, I guess, by Mirabel to, like, make the right choice. Like, because we talked about this in the first part. What would have happened if he walked through the door as a child? It seems like it was a possibility, according to Mirabel. Like, she didn't make him not go through the door. That was, like, all of him, right? So if he went through as a child, what would have happened? it's entirely possible he would have ended up doing this anyway, but like to a worse degree. Like maybe he doesn't find Simon. Maybe he ends up just dying because he never meets Dorian. Like,
right. And also he's 5 or whatever.
well, but he could be like trained to become
sure.
the person in this story, right? And that's like a worse life for him, but for the purposes of the story and for fate, it still works out for her, but it's not like a good version of the story, I guess. So it's like fate, but like also a little bit of not fate.
Yeah, I guess.
You know?
I guess.
Yeah. Speaking of fate, though, somebody definitely involved in that whole thing, another nudge, is we end up seeing Kat again.
I was like so confused when she came back, honestly, though, because they were like using her full name.
Yeah.
I was like, who is that?
Which is Katrina Hawkins. I didn't verify this because I was ill, but like, do you remember in the first interlude when Zachary's mother gets like that vision of, it's like the storm and she sees the farmhouse and like all of that stuff?
Yeah.
I'm like so curious if like, I mean, she's living in the farmhouse now, right? So like maybe the storm was actually Kat, like Katrina, like,
oh shit,
a seeing of this moment.
I didn't. Wow, it went like way over my head, the New Orleans like Katrina connection here. That would make a ton of sense. Yeah, especially because like there's something jarring about that scene of being like it's at the farmhouse, which is like what, in New York, like somewhere far away from Louisiana, and like having this vision of this storm coming through. That's good. I think that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, because it's also, we don't know this until later, but this 2 years later of the above world is when this story ends, right? Like, it's after this meeting that Kat ends up going through her own door. And that's kind of when, like, everything is changing, right? So, yeah. Basically, this interlude just tells us, though, that Zachary has been missing for 2 years.
Yeah.
But his mom is kind of, like, chill.
Very, very much so.
Yeah, but that's because she, I think, had her fortune told or something, where she would have 2 sons, and so she knows she has Zachary and a son-in-law, so she's just waiting for that time.
Very clever of her, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
To be like, yeah, I know what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was shocking to see her so settled, especially because as we get into this last book, like, I felt kind of shitty, like, I don't know, reading Kat be kind of sad and mystified and like having to figure out what's going on and almost even seeming a little crazy as a result. Like, I felt bad for her.
Yeah, because Kat is spending maybe not the entire 2 years, but especially after Zachary first disappears, nobody's really caring. Like, people disappear all the time, and she's just not having it. Like, she's not having it.
Yeah.
So she starts looking into why he disappeared, like what book he had. Odd things start happening where she's being like bugged and like followed, and electronic messages are just being absolutely zapped from existence, and it's looking like Zachary is also being wiped from existence, and she is still just kind of looking into everything, and she actually finds out a lot, which is crazy. She looks for like the bee, the key, the sword, and ends up on this like message board, and somebody sends the message of just don't, which is spooky on its own.
Right.
And then somebody else sends like the crown, heart, feather, the owl king is coming, which is also really intense. But also the owl king is nobody, so who gives a shit?
I mean, this is a case where I would think that the owl king is referring to Zachary.
Oh, interesting.
Because that's when everything's going to change, right?
Right. I guess that makes sense, yeah. And then crown, heart, feather is obviously like the new symbols we get in this new story. So yeah. That's actually a really good point.
I also think too, like back to the owl, that like the companion owl he gets, right? Like I kind of thought that was that, right? Of saying like, okay, he is the owl king now.
That's actually so true. Because when we get to like him talking to the ice Mirabel, he like tells the story of basically the future, like, he's making it up as he goes, but it seems like that story he's telling is what's going to happen next. Like, there's a door with a crown heart feather, which is, like, the door Kat ends up finding, and, like, so yeah, there's something, like, prophetic.
Yeah.
And he's also the son of the fortune teller. So, like, that's prophetic on its own, I suppose.
Which is, like, this is where it becomes really clear to me, too, that he's going to get stabbed. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because I think they do kind of laying it on, with the owl companion and these sort of comments where I'm like, I do think they mean Zachary. Then it's like, well, that means he's got to die.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. That's actually really smart, yeah. Okay, well, before we get there, this all of this cat stuff is kind of broken up into smaller excerpts that she's writing down, but we're obviously going to talk about it all at once.
Which, might I say, I liked the writing style for the diary entries a lot because it so contrasted everything else that was going on and felt like grounding in between those kind of more abstract scenes that come along in this part. So I was almost like, man, I wish more of the story came out this way because it feels much more concrete.
Because it's in first person, obviously, because it's Kat writing it all down, which is already so different from everything else. And then, yeah, this is all happening, like, in the above. And it's weird stuff she's looking into, but it does feel very, like, grounded, normal mystery type of stuff happening. And then we'll get, like, the next chapter, and it'll be like, the son of the fortune teller is dead. And you're like, oh, well.
Yeah, it is. It's like, it's reminding you that this book started in reality, right? Like, it may be a fantasy book, but it's not a fantasy world per se, at least not in full.
It's another cycle. Damn it. But one of the more interesting things Kat ends up finding is about the Keating Foundation. And we get some of it with, like, the Keeper and Mirabel up above, but we skipped it. What can you do? And we basically just learn the Keating Foundation. Jocelyn, Simon's mother, seemed to be in it, and it seemed to be a group. I mean, it wasn't called the Keating Foundation when she was in it. Like, that's just the name it was given. But it's a group that's been around for a while, it seems, and it seems like its purpose is to help Fate, like, help her kind of set up these nudges and, like, put things into place. Mostly for her, because it seems like Mirabel needed to be born outside of time. So they, like, made the inlet, the room, they, like, set up the Simon Eleanor type of thing. Set up in, like, the most hands-off way possible, I guess. They're kind of just, like, setting up fated events to happen. And obviously Sweet Sorrows needs to end up in a specific library, so, like, that is... They're just, like, helping to pull strings, I guess, for Mirabel, while Mirabel is not Mirabel yet.
Do you remember what they said the reason was that they were, like, so motivated to make this happen? To, like, have Mirabel come into existence?
I mean, for the purposes of the story, I'm saying that, like, in universe, like, the purposes of the story, and, like, something about Fate needing to be born outside of time.
Yeah. Okay, I think I might just come down to the first part of that I'm looking for, because I was like, is this another Fate thing, or did I forget, like, them saying some reason that this particular group of people would have ever been interested in this?
Oh, yeah, I'm not really sure. I can't remember.
I guess these are repeated questions I have about people's motivations, like, both on Allegra's side and now on the Keating Foundation side, are the parts of the book that feel not fleshed out enough for me, even with the Fate perspective. It's like, I really do want, like, something a little bit more than Fate here, like, or just to accept that these groups existed and had a purpose, but not understand why, you know?
Well, I think the Keating Foundation is a bit similar to Rhyme. Like, I don't know if I'd fully call them acolytes, but, like, they're kind of serving the story, right? Like, why does a person serve any kind of deity? Like, what is the motivation? I don't know. They just kind of do, right?
That's fair. Yeah, I guess that's a good point too, right? Like, they are kind of the surface parallels of the acolytes and the guardians, so.
And then the interesting thing for the Keating Foundation is the picture Kat ends up finding. It's called, like, a meeting of owls. So it also seems like this foundation is kind of like the Parliament of Owls, in a way. Like, trying to bring in that change within the story. So it feels like a divergence from what we know the Parliament as, which is the ones that tore apart fate. But I think, like, we set up pretty early in this book that traditions change and, like, the jobs of things change. Like, the keeper has changed 100 different times, right? So I think, like, the parliament changing makes sense.
Now, dare I bring up another crazy Allegra theory here?
Okay.
It's not really, I really don't feel super strongly about this. It's just, I had this feeling that Allegra was also a bit reminiscent of Fate. And maybe that's because she's kind of being played by Fate in this story. And the reason I thought about it, honestly, it was mostly just like the whole, like, she chose her eye to be removed thing. And I just remember when they were describing the owls, like, picking apart, like, the body of Fate in the early story, like, it kind of reminded me of, like, oh, like, her eye was taken, or was, whatever it was, of, like, her body being picked apart. And then on top of the fact that she was, like, effectively, like, died for the purposes of Fate, so that way the story could go along. I'm like, okay, maybe Allegra isn't exactly Fate, but she is reminiscent of Fate. And so maybe in this case, like, when we're talking about the owls, the problem of owls picking apart Fate, it's really Allegra that's getting picked apart instead of Mirabel. Like, maybe she's if we're talking about surface parallels, she's like the surface parallel for Fate.
Right. If we have, like, parts of the story that need to happen again to, like, close them out type of situation, then you have, like, Allegra with the eye fulfilling that aspect of it, and then you also have Zachary fulfilling the heart aspect of it type of situation. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I think there'd be missing features if that's the case, but that's at least that they seemed like maybe that's what they were getting at, like, paralleling.
Yeah. But for Kat, it's still kind of like, it's still, like, a little bit unclear how she fits into everything. She does end up with a feather key, so an interesting symbol for her, perhaps. And it's basically for, quote, when the time has come, time capital T, of course. And that's kind of where she's left. And then while all of that is happening, though perhaps not at the same time, we have all the Zachary chapters, which all start with Son of the Fortune Teller. I think, like, at this point, all of the Zachary narrated chapters have fully become part of the story. We've talked about, like, Zachary talking to the moon. The moon does kind of help, like, in the dream sense. Like, Zachary's able to give Dorian the sword in a dream, and then the moon will end up delivering that sword to Dorian at the inn, which, like, seems like a good idea at the time.
Yeah,
but, like,
if only he knew.
Isn't really, isn't great. And then we get the scene I mentioned, which is when Zachary tells a story to the ice Mirabel, which seemed quite pointless at first, because nothing really happened in regards to, like, telling the story. But I do think it's just, like, to have two things. Zachary starts by telling the story, like, of his life. So I think in that moment he's giving Mirabel his life. And then he tells the story of, well, he makes it up, but it seems to be of what's going to happen next, like with the next door and, like, people exploring and, like, all of these things happening. And it seems that foresight we talked about when you were talking about Zachary being the Owl King. So that's what it seems like the story is for. But it doesn't really do anything. It's really, like, Mirabel taking the Fortune and Fables key from around his neck and then, like, burning it into his chest afterwards. That seems to matter.
Of course, yeah.
And this is, I don't know if this is when, like, Mirabel has his heart at this point and, like, has received the heart of fate, whatever you want to call it. But at the very least, it seems to be like the promise of that action. Like, this is when his life is, like, locked down. The bees describe it as, like, you're finally ending the story, you're locking it, you're, like, closing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's dead. He ends up kind of in this dollhouse-esque universe, and he meets the bees. And, well, they're not actually bees, but they're looking like bees right now, I guess.
Yeah, they like bees, apparently.
Yeah. And they answer our most important question from the first part.
They did.
They are the kitchen.
I would have never guessed this one. This was way
I
too
know.
far out of scope from the first half of the book to understand that this was an option.
Yeah. But basically, they can craft anything out of the honey. It seems pretty, straightforward, I guess.
Yeah.
And then they are mentioning a her that's different than the her that Zachary's mentioning, because they're actually talking about the story sculptor, which is quite interesting, because she basically promised them like a key to lock end the story, which is what Zachary is. And that's basically how we know that the story sculptor and Mirabel are the same person, which I thought was really interesting, that fate basically locked away her own heart for this moment, I suppose, because she knew how the story had to go, I presume.
Yeah, sorry, I'm actually just making that connection of like, yeah, it is fate's own heart. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it just like shows how long she's been putting things into place, right, for this end result.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to for fate. The whole thing is arranging story. Time is not really of the importance here.
Right, which is interesting because like the keeper does like nothing. I guess he saves Dorian, which like changes the ending of this story.
That's true.
But for the most part, like the point of it is the keeper is inactive, right? And Mirabel gets upset about this. Like, she's willing to take risks and like make action to kind of reach the end, but he is so cautious and like unwilling to push, and so he just kind of slowly continues on.
Yeah,
it just like matches kind of everything they're about.
Yeah, I mean, he's his whole thing is kind of to be constant, right?
Yeah. It seems like when we reach this point of the book, we've talked about some of it, like Zachary needing to tie up loose ends. It seems like there's not like a clear discussion as to why Zachary is in this position. He's kind of upset about it because he has just died.
Yes. Yeah, he feels like a pawn, and he kind of should. I think this is the part of the book too where you're supposed to question Mirabel, right? Like, I think there was a little bit of lead up to it as well, of like the darkness being like they're kind of just using you, which is like not wrong, by the way.
Yeah.
Like there is this feeling here that like, yeah, I've just been put through all this stuff and whatever, I've been subjected to fate, and like I didn't even get to choose my own story, live my own life. Like I didn't even like this stuff didn't exist to me until I showed up here. So like, why should my life be defined by this?
Yeah, it's bringing back those feelings he had like when he saw the burned down dollhouse and like he missed it, right? And that's kind of also how he felt about his life, as you mentioned. And so, like, a lot of this doesn't feel satisfying. Like, even him talking with Mirabel for a moment, like, their conclusion, I think it's maybe supposed to feel satisfying because they, like, kiss and, like, seem to part on good terms, I guess. But, like, there is still kind of, like, that feeling that he's losing in this situation. Like, he is dying for something that he didn't know about. And, like, he didn't really choose, I guess. So, it's still, I don't know. In my head, it's still a bit bitter. But he at least seems to accept it.
Yeah.
And the story's over, right? Like, the keeper and Rhyme are leaving the harbor. They can't see what happens next. It's like done. The harbor is being taken by the sea. Something else will happen. And we kind of get like all of the characters in their final places. Dorian is with Eleanor. Simon is just a little bit away still. Zachary's dead. Kat is given an address with paintings and sees one of herself. There's a door she could go through, and she thinks about it and decides to go through. And then we have Dorian kind of like with a heart of fate, or a heart belonging to fate.
Yes. Started connecting some dots.
Yeah, he's like, would fate mind if, we did something else with this heart? Because you would think in regards to the story, like, we need to get this heart to fate to finish the story. But he's like, Dorian is kind of not cared. Like, he's been disconnected enough from this story, and he also knows Mirabel enough that it's like, would she care if I gave this heart to Zachary, basically? And that's why I think, I don't know if Dorian was originally supposed to be a part of this story, but I think he was necessary to reach this ending because Zachary's willing to like do the sacrifice thing for the story, but Dorian's kind of like selfish, right? Like he's not as close to Mirabel, like he's not seen working together with her. Like I don't even know if he gives a shit about this story other than Zachary.
Right,
like he cares about Zachary,
For
right?
sure.
So like you need somebody in the story who's willing to go against fate and even anger fate possibly to reach like the happy ending, which is what Mirabel wants in the end.
Yeah, he's kind of the chaos agent.
I don't know. That's how I'm reading.
Yeah,
like,
I like that read for sure. Yeah, and it makes the story kind of end as I think Mirabel intends, right? 'Cause she says her whole like, I wanted to, or I gave him a good ending, right? Like I think she knows like this that Dorian fills in that gap to make that happen.
Yeah. So yeah, we get like the chapter that cites like fate fell in love with time. You mentioned it earlier, but that time, but this time it's like about Zachary and Dorian. So like again, that mirroring cycle, blah blah blah.
Yep.
And this confused me, I think, just because like we had just gotten like a whole thing about how stories should end, and like they need to end, and like we need to enter into something new, and like all of those things happening. But then we also get a quote that's like, no story truly ends. So I'm like I understand the sentiment, but I'm like, it's a contradiction to what we just experienced.
Yeah. I mean, just like the whole fate, is fate actually controlling things or not? Like,
yeah,
I get you. It seems inconsistent to say, like this shouldn't. The stories end, but this one doesn't, I guess.
Right, because Zachary and Dorian are supposed to be, I guess, this new rendition of time and fate.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the story between them is going to be different. But I'm kind of just like, just stop it entirely. Like, if we're starting a new story, we should stop all of these comparisons between characters. Zachary has already moved away from, like, the symbols of the old stories.
Right, he's broken the mold.
He's found a new door, like... but then we bring some of it back still with like the crown heart feather and like this time and fate thing again, and it's like, well, actually stories don't end. And it's like, okay, but then what was the point of all of this?
I guess
like
I could envision it for this case where we are talking about kind of a cycle, right? Like the cycle has probably still ended, and like now we're kind of on an offshoot. Like it still continues in that they're not dead, right? But it's not going to be the same story anymore. So like I guess like the cycle story does end. It's just that the way it ends kind of requires them to live out their lives until their lives end.
I guess I just wanted like a hard stop. We're moving on to something new.
Yeah, I get that, but I don't know.
Yeah. And I could like accept the symbols still sticking around because we've already set up that things change. Like the symbols we have for things change and shift, and like they're not as defined as we may want them to be. So like I was fine with that repetition because the symbols mean something else now, right? Like the crown heart feather. I would assume they just mean Zachary at this point.
Yeah.
But I don't know. That was like the only thing that bothered me about the end, because it felt like a going back on what we had wanted type of situation. But I understand what you mean. It is still something new. It is a new story. It's just like a continuation in a series, I guess, more than like a completely new book.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But speaking of that small gripe, I guess, I'll give my review. That's like really the only thing that bothered me, I guess, with everything. And then also I really don't want it to affect me, but the fact that I was sick
comes back to this.
I know. I really wanted to finish this book as quickly as possible, and I feel like that took away some of like the magic and like the energy of the end of this book. So it's hard for me to pinpoint if it was the end of this book or if it was me that just wasn't like emotionally struck by the ending, I guess. Like there was nothing about it that felt just emotional, I guess, in any capacity, either good or bad or whatever. Like, I don't know. So, like, there's a lot of it that I did like, which would make me feel like a 5 is appropriate, but like because it didn't hit those like emotional beats at the end, I'm like, is it a 5 or is it like a 4?
Mm-hmm.
Is it just a 4? Like, it's rough. This might be a book I just have to reread on my own.
Yeah, not doing it for this too. Yeah.
Yeah,
Take
and
your
then
time.
maybe the ending will be like better, especially because this is like a cyclical book, and like starting it again knowing the ending I feel like would only help it. So I might just rate this a 4, and then we'll see what happens like next year. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. I do feel similarly. I may have done a disservice to the later part of this book in moving too fast. So, and I almost do think rereading it is probably appropriate because, like, actually, like, since we had some extra days between when we actually finished the book and when we recorded, I like started listening to some of the chapters again because it's like maybe it'll make more sense now that I've already read through it. I I think I find myself at the end, well, of course, feeling like disappointment about Allegra. I think I said quite a bit about that, but just feeling like she wasn't fleshed out enough. She didn't get a chance of redemption and explanation, and I don't know. I just like wanted more out of her than there was, and I just feel like she got cut a little short. So, so I think that bothered me a bit. I think it was a little hard to get invested in Zachary and Dorian, even though I will say again, I don't think the author like leaned too hard on that romance, so it didn't bring the book down a whole lot. But I just wanted to care a little bit more. And then, like, I think I just generally have a problem with fate stories. Is what I'm learning with some of these recent books. Is like, it's cool mechanically, maybe, and like the way that it allows you to focus on these other things in the story. But I just find myself feeling a little empty about like what is the motivation, what is the reason, what is driving this thing forward beyond kind of like a mystical force like fate. So it maybe in some ways that means that this is just not the type of book for me, but. Because I agree with you. I think it was like well written. Like I enjoyed listening to it, reading it. I did have to like step away from the audiobook sometimes because when it gets abstract, it's hard for me to follow the audiobook. But like I thought it was fun to read. I liked the story, interludes, all that. So I think it was like a well written book. I really have trouble saying like that anything structurally about the book is the problem beyond like the character, Allegra character. So I feel kind of bad because I'm like I kind of want to give it a 3 still, and I think it's just because I think it's just because it didn't really strike me, right? It didn't appeal to me, and like it's just not enough for me to like be like like structurally it's nice, the writing is nice, but like the story, like while interesting, just didn't do anything for me. I think so. I think it maybe it's just one of those ones where it comes down to a personal preference. I like fantasy. It's not even that. I think just something about what the book happened to actually just be about. It wasn't the sort of message that struck me.
Fair. Yeah. So you're going with a 3.
Yeah, so I think it's a 3 for me. It feels like wrong though, because like there's other things I've given a 3 that are absolutely like not as good as this. So like I feel like I need to reevaluate, but that's where I'm feeling it right now.
Well, somber end.
Sorry. Yeah. Do we want to squeeze in a good vibes? I could do a quick one.
Yeah, we'll squeeze one in. Go ahead.
Mine is Zachary Ezra Rawlins. Great name. I loved like the repeated starting, like transitioning into his parts with Zachary Ezra Rawlins did this. Like I thought that was super fun, and like I don't know, even though he does kind of lose that name later at the end of the book, it was like a nice consistency in the book and a badass name. It's
a good sounding name. Names are hard in writing, but
yeah, I agree.
Good vibe for me. Let's just say the entirety of Fortunes and Fables is like my good vibe.
Yeah.
Just like getting all of those stories that seem disconnected but like end up coming back around in some capacity. But also some of them don't, right? So like, I don't know. It's just an interesting way to present possibly this world. And we get some of that with also like the ruins and like the underground. Like this was a civilization here. That we missed. So something very sad about that. But like we see glimpses of it in the stories told, and also can understand how almost epic, I guess, this time and fate story is, and the offshoots of it as well, with like the moon and the innkeeper. And we get part of it in Fortunes and Fables, and then Zachary notes like, but what happens after? And so the rest of this book kind of gives us the afters of things. Right. But yeah, all of Fortunes and Fables I loved, I guess. but that's like my vibe. So
yeah, no, I did too. I have to agree with you.
I definitely went insane in the first part, trying to connect absolutely everything. And it's like, well, the Star Merchant, he doesn't come back around, so who cares, you know? But that is the Starless Sea, I suppose. For next month, we are reading the Odyssey. I'm kidding. I'm reading the Odyssey. Could you imagine, though?
Oh, man. I would die.
You would die.
This episode would have to release in 3 months.
Yeah. But what we're actually reading is Pretty Dead Things by Lillian West. We're going back to the cozy mystery area, I guess, genre. It has like the dual timelines going on, basically. We have Cora in the present time who stumbles upon these rings during an estate sale, and looking into them kind of means she also ends up looking into this decades-old mystery. And so the past sections seem to be centered around that mystery, with the character Clarity, who seems to go missing, but nobody really takes it seriously because she seems to be flaky and is apparently a homewrecker and, you know, all the things we call women when we hate them. Right. So it seems like we're going to figure out what happened in regards to that disappearance. We're reading up to, but not including, chapter 14. It's a very short book, only like 270 pages, which is definitely a change from what we've been like reading recently.
Half as long as this book.
Yeah, which will be nice. And then obviously it's a mystery, so
yay.
Hopefully we get some good sleuthing going on.
Yeah, I love a mystery.
So if you have your own thoughts and theories, all of our socials are in the description. I don't know. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.